Today's review is for Mortal Engines, directed by Christian Rivers and produced by Peter Jackson. It takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where cities ride on wheels and consume other smaller cities to survive. And it tells the story about a woman named Hester Shaw and a man named Tom Natsworthy who meet together in the massive traction city of London and try to stop a conspiracy. Now, I've heard that this film is actually based on a series of books called The Hungry City Chronicles by Philip Reed. This is another series of books I haven't read before, but I was still interested to see what Peter Jackson and director Chris Rivers could do with this movie. I mean, the trailer looked really cool, and again, Peter Jackson is involved. How can you go wrong with Peter friggin' Jackson? This is the guy who brought us the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the absolute greatest trilogy of all time. So yeah, I was totally looking forward to this movie for that alone. And it honestly did not live up to my hopes at all. Mortal Engines was honestly another one of those movies that I wasn't exactly that hyped for, but I was expecting it to be decent, especially since Peter Jackson is involved. This movie should have been great, but honestly, it was kind of a letdown. All the characters in this movie are really bland and uninteresting. They have barely any real character development, and I never really cared about them at all. Hester Shaw herself as well is a really bland protagonist who doesn't really have much going for her. I'm sure she was written a lot better in the original novels, but I didn't care for her at all in this movie. Even when she told Tom about her tragic past, I was not at all interested. And even Tom Natsworthy I thought was pretty lame. He's a bland love interest for Hester, and he even tries to provide enough humor for the film, but it mostly just falls pretty flat. Okay, completely flat. However, the character I was disappointed with the most in this movie was Hugo Weaving's character, Thaddeus Valentine, the villain of the film. The reason I was at least looking forward to him in this movie is because this is Hugo Weaving. This is one of the guys who played some of my favorite movie characters in film history. V, Elrond, Megatron, Agent Smith, Old Georgie, you name it. And he actually turned out to be really generic. I was really disappointed with Weaving's character in this movie. Also, I wasn't into the subplot of the giant weapon. Not just because it's a Death Star ripoff, but because it just doesn't give off that much of an intimidating vibe like the Death Star did in A New Hope. It's just a big, cool-looking death machine, like Quintessa's ship from The Last Night, or the Technodrome. It's just cool, I guess. Also, this film was very predictable. Like, there's this medallion that Hester keeps carrying around, and I was able to easily predict that it was going to play a pivotal role at the end of the movie. And sure enough, it did. I mean, even good films can be pretty predictable, even more predictable than this, but this film is honestly one of the worst at doing so. Now, look, this film was definitely not very good, but it's not frustrating. You know what I mean? I mean, there are actually some really decent things that I can point out in this movie. The CGI is really beautiful to look at, the direction is pretty cool, and even though I didn't care about any of the characters, I do believe that the actors did do what they could with their roles performance-wise. Although there is one thing I can totally, absolutely praise about this movie. You may remember me saying that I didn't care about any of the characters, right? Well, okay, I'd be wrong in that, because there is actually one single character in this movie that I actually did really like a lot. That character being a cyborg steampunk zombie named Shrike, played by Stephen Lang. He was the best part of this entire movie. He was the only character in this film I even remotely cared about. He had this backstory that I actually did find to be pretty interesting, and he even had moments where he was actually genuinely scary. Like, there's a scene where he breaks into a room and he beats up all these people who are attacking him. And it actually makes him seem like a legit monster that couldn't be stopped. He is definitely one of the best examples of a good character in a bad movie. I want to see an entire movie about him. I don't care about what else is going on in the movie. The scenes that he's in alone are worth watching enough. And he actually does make me want to buy the movie when it comes out on DVD or something. Heck, I'll spend $30 on a Blu-ray of this movie at a Walmart just so I can skip most of the actual plot and only watch the scenes that he's in. Shrike was an awesome character. I freaking loved him. But again, he's the only character I liked. The only character. All the other characters are pretty much just a bunch of cardboard boxes. So yeah, Mortal Engines was definitely a letdown. I wouldn't exactly call it a horrible movie. It had a lot of cool effects, decent settings, and of course, Shrike was amazing. But even with all that, it was not enough to save this film from being an overall dull movie. As I'm really sure it could have been way better if Peter Jackson did direct it. I can assure you on that one. I'm going to give Mortal Engines a 3 out of 10. Not the absolute worst movie in the world. I mean, yeah, I would totally put it on the top 8 worst movies of the year list. However, I put it at the very beginning of the list because that would just mean it was just simply disappointing. This film never made me angry while watching it. It wasn't a chore to get through. But, I just didn't really care. It would have been better if they made Shrike the main character. But of course, they couldn't do that because that's not how it was in the books. By the way, are the books even that good? Again, I haven't read them. Peter Jackson usually stays very true to novel source material all the time whenever he makes a movie like these. How different is this from the books? If the books are really very much how this movie goes, then I'm willing to bet that the books are equally as uninteresting. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. I'll see you next time, and peace out.